Hey everyone. So in last week's video, we composed and staged this shot of my dining area that we're taking. And now that everything is arranged exactly how we want it and the camera's all set up, I'm gonna roll into the photography, and from there we'll send those photos into the computer where I'll walk you through my post-processing to see what the final image comes out to be. So let's get started. All right, so for the photography portion of this, it's a pretty simple shot. We've just got two flashes, one that I'm walking around with while controlling the camera with the Cam Ranger. That's going to be the main light and mimics the sunlight coming through that window. The other one is just providing some fill to the shadows, and it's placed on a light stand to camera left. You'll see when the iPad moves over for a quick second that I've flagged off the window to the far left. There's also a window to my left right now that's also flagged off, and that's just to control the natural light that's coming in this space. I want all that natural light to come in from that big window, and then I'll provide a little bit of fill with a flash. So right now what I'm doing is running around and just waiting for that shadow to be in the right spot. Looks like it is just about now, so I'm taking the final shots with the flash, making sure that everything looks right in the camera first. And then when that's complete, I'll move over to the camera and I'm just gonna take a series of brackets to get the ambient light exposed correctly. And I'll mainly be using the ambient light to fill in some of the natural looking light and shadows that are happening on the ceiling, and a little bit for the window. So now we've moved into Capture One where I've imported the photos, and I just do a quick rating of the images using the star system to select which ones I'm going to work on before moving into the raw conversion. And I do the raw conversion relatively simple stuff, messing with contrast, making sure my white balance is right and is even across the frames. And then I'll send the photos into Photoshop where I'll do most of the legwork. I was planning on walking through this step by step in real time, but realized pretty quickly that that was quite boring as I narrate things while working. So thought instead that I'd speed things up a little bit more than others while talking through it here. And I think that should create a more digestible video. So now we're just wrapping up the editing in Capture One. I have this one frame that I'm planning on using for the window, so I'm changing the hue of the cyans and greens outside to make that a nice warm green for that vegetation. And then once that is complete, I do one more shot here for the ceiling that I will end up blending in. I just want to remove some of the shadow so it's not super contrasty up there. And I think everything looks good, so we're going to batch everything together and export into TIFFs into Photoshop. All right, and once into Photoshop, I have a script written to auto stack the images, which does an auto align also, just in case the camera got bumped or something. Then I go through and make sure that I rename the layers, just so I know which one is intended to do what. So as far as exposure blending goes, this shot's going to be pretty simple. You can see right off the bat that the flash did a great job here of balancing the natural light, but also illuminating some of the shadows that are created in a natural frame like we just saw. So what I did is I used a flash base layer and then another flash base layer with a shadow that I really liked, just because of the way that the shadows of the plants looked on the wall. So once that was done, I bring in this ambient layer for the window and do a quick pen tool selection of that, and then feather the selection, and then I'll add that in, and right away that's improved. And we'll go back in later and correct the white balance on the white windowsill there. So now I'm going through, I've duplicated this layer, and I'm going to do a little bit more detailed pen tool around these interior objects on the sill. And then we're just going to blend those in a little bit more with the ambient, because that flash is making those really hot and bright, and they wouldn't naturally be that way when the light is coming from the outside. So I'm just going to sort of softly blend those two together. The other reason I'll be using an ambient layer is that light fixture. You'll see in the top right corner of it, there's a really bright hot spot from my flash. So I'll do a selection of this light fixture, and then we'll blend in that top right area and probably that bottom left area to get rid of those hot spots that are reflecting in that light. So you just want to be conscious of reflective surfaces and ensure that your light, your camera, and yourself and other people are not creating unwanted reflections in surfaces. So once that's done, I have my last layer here, which is an ambient ceiling layer. So this is the layer that I sort of soften the shadows of that upper area. And the reason that I want this is because the window does create these nice shadows from the duct and the light fixture there on the ceiling, and I'd like to add some of those in. So I'm using a really light opacity brush and just softly blending those in. And I'm just gonna toy with them a little bit until it looks right to my eye. You see, if I didn't blend this layer in, we would be getting this a light color on the opposite side of the window on that light fixture, which doesn't feel natural at all, given that all of our light source is coming from the right side mainly. So I did a more intentional selection here that I could then brush that shadow side back onto the light, and I think it looks a lot more natural. Now I'm just double checking that when I used that big brush, there was a little overlap because there's an air vent up above and it moves those plants around. So I just want to make sure that any of that is taken care of with a little bit more care. So the next thing I'm doing is starting with my color corrections. This means basically that you want to make sure that any neutral colored objects in a scene are in fact neutral to the eye. Walls and floor and ceiling surfaces will often take on reflective colors from the outside or from light fixtures or from other materials. So it helps to tone those down a bit. You don't want to tone it down all the way, but sometimes it can begin to look a little bit artificial. So what I do is I use the pen tool to select either the white surfaces or the surfaces with color information in them. Here I'm doing the color information because that's what I thought was going to be easier. Obviously this plant is going to be a little difficult, so I do just some sort of quick selections of the parts of it that are easy to select, and then I'll go back through with a magic wand, maybe a brush, to touch up the edges of that a little bit later. To finish off the selection, since I've already created selections of both the window and that light fixture, I can right click on those earlier masks and add them in, and then I'm option clicking on my HueSaturation mask that I've created to make sure that everything is selected the way that I want it, and then I can brush in anything that was missed. So then I feather that selection just so it has a little bit of a soft edge, just to be a little bit more forgiving, and then start playing around with the saturation levels. I drop it down to a 78 first, and then I think I go down a little bit more just to land at a happy spot, which I think ends up being -84. The next thing I do is I use that same mask to create a curves layer to lighten all of the neutral surfaces. Sometimes I think that neutral surfaces can be a little bit too contrasty for an image and darken an image when it wants to feel light and airy. So this is one method that I employ to control that. And then, so I don't disturb that mask, I create a group and put that curves layer within that group and create a mask on top of that, and then I can just brush those adjustments in. So I mostly brushed them in up by the duct and the light fixture, and then down on the dark floor a little bit to lighten that just a hair, but I didn't want to do it to the entire image. Next I move into the retouching, which is essentially just a lot of healing and cloning, removal of little unwanted objects and imperfections really helps to remove distractions from an image that otherwise might draw attention to unwanted places. There's a shadow here that's being cast from the duct onto that back wall, and the way that it intersects with the light was something that I found distracting, so I thought that I would brush that out. Then going in here and doing, the more complicated clone stamp work where, there's this outlet that's behind this wire mesh chair, so a little bit tricky, but with a little bit of patience, it goes away pretty quickly, and it's a nice distraction to get rid of. Now that we're done, I'll do a universal curve just to up the contrast a little bit. I don't use presets. I just think it's always nice to mess with them individually. I tone the blue down just a little bit to create a little bit of warmth, because we are getting warmth from that outside light. The last thing that I was doing here is the combination of the natural light on this piece of art and my flash was creating sort of a double shadow situation, and I didn't like it, so I thought that I'd just play around with an ambient layer and see if I can pull some more of that ambient shadow that was a little bit more defined out, just sort of for fun, for the exercise of this tutorial. So I wind up changing the blending mode to luminosity, so only the levels are affected and color is not affected. And then I use this blend if mode, which really helps have another layer of control when you're blending things together. So if you go into the layer properties, you can tell the layer not to pay attention to anything brighter or darker than a certain range, and you can sort of feather that. So if you don't know how to use that tool, that's one that's really worth toying around with, and I thought this would be a good way to show it. So it's a subtle change, but to me it really makes a difference. Most people probably wouldn't notice it, but it's something that you can employ in other ways in other types of shots. So now we're all done, and I've merged one more time into a final layer. And from here, I do my perspective control at the very end by using a camera raw filter. I just find that this is the most precise way to do perspective controls, and it's just my preferred way of doing it. And I wait till the very end just in case down the line I need to come in after the fact and make some adjustments to my adjustment layers. I'll know that they all line up correctly, and then I'll just have to do that one last adjustment one more time. And this is just one last thing that I thought I'd just throw in as a tip. I wouldn't normally do this, but another way of controlling color contamination is to create a color layer and switch the blending mode to color, and you can kind of quickly get rid of any unwanted color contamination that is happening. One last thing that I thought of after the fact is that this, the way that this light interacts with the duct was creating an adjacency that I really didn't like, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to move that light fixture up a little bit and show how quickly that could be done and how much of a visual impact I think that makes. Where it was distracting before, now it kind of breaks the plane of that line of the top of the duct much more naturally, and it feels more resolved. So again, not something that you necessarily need to do, but just thinking of things that come up in these types of shoots and ways that they might be resolved if they couldn't be resolved in person, which this couldn't be because of the level the camera had to be at, because of its relationship with the kitchen countertop and how tall that was in blocking the view to the floor below. And so there we go. You can see the before and after. Some people will think it was silly of me to do that. I think it was kind of silly of me to do that, but just shows another technique that can be employed when needed. And my last step is to always save a layered file so I can always go back and make changes, whether a client asks for them or there's something that I see that needs to be addressed. So I don't have to make changes on top of a file that's already been flattened. And that's it. So I'm pretty pleased with the final image, and I hope that you guys like it too. But more importantly, I hope that you find value in being able to see behind the scenes at my process from start to finish. And hopefully this helps to demystify what goes on in the creation of an architectural and interior photograph. I know I benefited greatly over the years from people sharing, whether it be in full tutorials or YouTube videos and blog posts and things like that. So I just wanted to pay that forward a bit by doing this, but also to get my feet wet and think about how I want to share this type of thing moving forward. So I look forward to hearing your feedback and ideas for future videos in the comments below, and look forward to creating more content like this in the future. So thanks for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you next time.